Hi, I'm Dale Peterson of S4 Events and Digital Bond. And I wish we were all together in Salt Lake City together like we had planned, but unfortunately that didn't happen. There were two reasons I wanted to be there. One was I think face-to-face meetings are better for building the ICS security community. And second, I used to live in Park City and I was looking forward to getting another weekend of skiing in. Unfortunately, we're going to miss that SCADA Security Summit. But we'll do the best we can. We're here online, and I've got about a 30-minute presentation for you on the future of ICS security products. Now, this is recorded, so it's not a live event, so I'll actually be active in the chat. So if while this is going on, you have questions or comments, feel free to hit me up in the chat, and then afterwards we'll do a Q&A. Now, I just wanted to set the stage a little bit for this. I've been involved in ICS security products for a while. Back in 2006, we had a contract with DHS to develop the first intrusion detection signatures for ICS security products. And they were just proof of concept at the time, but we thought that they would be developed and they would get a lot better over the years. Unfortunately, it was maybe 10 years later and they were pretty much the same. But then in 2016, a lot of money came into this market. And now we've seen just an explosion of products and capabilities, and now what's available isn't just 10x better, it's 100x, 1000x, or even more. So we do now have a nice crop of ICS security products, which is great. The challenge is you have to figure out what to do with them as an asset owner. Now I want to hit two problems you might run into. The first is, a lot of times people think a product is going to solve their problem. It's great. I spend this money, I buy this product, I'm done. But I'm sure all of you realize that there's a lot of work involved in getting the benefits out of the product, and you have to plan for that and budget it. We've seen mistakes in the enterprise and in the ICS world where people buy a product, install it, it sits there, it's quote working, but you're getting none of the benefits. That's one problem. The other issue is we now have a lot of these companies, and they're out there and they've raised a lot of venture capital, they're spending it in sales and marketing, and they're hitting up your executives with very aggressive measures and messages. And the problem is, if your executives are sold to and they decide, hey, we want to buy this product specifically, once they've made that decision, it's very hard to turn around. To get an executive to say, oh no, I was wrong, we should do it your way, mid-level manager or ICS security guy. So you need to get out in front of this. You need to pick the products that fit the strategy that you want to implement. And then you need to sell that up. You need to talk about those strategies and tactics and how the products you're considering fit into that so that management knows what they're doing before they see these pitches. So that's what I want to do in this presentation. I've got a bunch of slides that are going to talk about where the market is today, how you should think about it, and probably most importantly, what you should be planning for over the next 2 to 5 years. The ICS detection market started to get serious in about 2016 when a large number of companies, about 25 plus, started to get seed funding and Series A funding. You see a list of them up here, but that's only part of them. But a funny thing happened. They originally were created to develop this detection capability to be able to detect attacks on industrial control systems. But when they did that, they found that a lot of the asset owners, in fact, most of the asset owners, weren't quite frankly ready for the products. Because what ends up happening is you get this deluge of information, and unless you have a very mature ICS security program and are willing to hire the people to staff up and handle this huge wave of alerts and other events you're getting, the products really aren't of great value to you. I'd encourage you to take a look at Rebecca Moore's presentation from S420. She worked at a refinery where she went through this exact problem, and she maps out how much time, manpower, and money it costs to actually use one of these products as a detection solution. So there was a bit of a quandary. These new products, with admittedly some very good capabilities, were available. There were a lot of vendors trying to sell them, and yet the customers weren't ready for them. But fortunately for the market asset inventory came to the rescue. Most asset owners had no asset inventory. They didn't know what was on their ICS network. And if they had anything, it typically was an out-of-date spreadsheet. And one of the things that the competitors in this space found in the detection space was when they came in and did a demo, not only the security folks, but also the engineers were just amazed at the visibility these products could get them. And they said, hey, could we use this to figure out what's on our network? And the concept of asset inventory was born. And this was really an easy win for customers and vendors and continues to be to this day. But a sidelight to this was the question whether the asset inventory should be done just through passively listening on the network or whether you should actually go out and query devices as well. Now, it's probably not a surprise to you, but operations is very conservative about what gets put on their network. In fact, there's a long history of hearing that things are impossible until they no longer are impossible. For example, in the 90s, it was impossible to use Ethernet and Windows in an industrial control system. Then we heard antivirus was impossible, application whitelisting was impossible, virtualization was impossible. And similarly, I even remember back in 2006 when we first did the passive IDS signatures, I had operations people tell me that there was no way you could deploy passive IDS on a SCADA or DCS because it would break the system, even though it wasn't inserting anything on the network. It was actually a pretty easy prediction that Active was going to win the day, win this fight. And the reason for it is it's just so much better at getting information. The key here is it's not scanning. It's sending legitimate protocol requests. So just as, for example, a Rockwell automation tool like RS Logix or something like that can go out and tell you what cards are in the PLC, what firmware version it's running, what was the last time logic was loading, an active capability that sends those same requests can get that same information. And you're going to get a lot more and a lot more accurate information through that. But it's not scanning. One of the predictions I made a couple of years ago was that all passive solutions will add active. And in fact, that's happened. I don't think anyone remains today that does not have an active capability because they were just getting their butts kicked in competitions by those that could demonstrate an active capability. Right now, a hybrid, when it comes to using these tools to create an asset inventory, a hybrid solution is what is winning. Now, if you're still in the position that you can't stomach active, now it might not be you yourself, but your operations, people are saying there is no way you can do that on my network. The workaround, and again, not as good as active, is to do passive, but then use your actual engineering workstation or other systems to send out requests to gather the information you would want in your asset inventory. Your passive solutions are going to listen to these and pick them up and add that information in. In fact, I've seen a lot of bake-offs where asset owners collect PCAPs without any sort of these administrative calls to gather information, and the information in the asset inventory isn't that great. But this is an interim solution before you do get to this hybrid active-passive solution. And when we're talking about asset inventory, we have to realize that the information that these tools, these detection products that are now creating asset inventories are getting you, aren't really what you want for an asset inventory. For example, they don't tell you physical location. They don't tell you criticality. They don't tell you who is responsible for that asset. So they can gather part of the information you want, but it isn't really what you're going to want in the end in your asset inventory. To take that a step further, asset inventory is just part of the asset management solution you'd want. You're going to want change management, vulnerability management, configuration management. So you're going to actually want an asset management solution, and this little bit you're getting here through this detection product is just a small part of it. So the question really is whether you should have a combined asset management and detection solution, or whether they should be separate solutions. My prediction, this one has not yet come true, is that asset management and detection will be separate solutions. And the reason for that is they are just very different products. Now, I had thought that some of the detection solutions might pivot to asset management, but that really hasn't happened yet. And my expectation is this solution will come true increasingly over the next 2 to 3 years. And what you'll see is that the asset management solution will talk to the detection and response solutions. So for example, Your asset management solution might have your true asset inventory, your single source of truth. But boy, it would be nice to have my ICS detection solution tell me when it sees something new on the network, or tells me that it sees a change. Send that information to my asset management solution so I can figure out, was this an authorized change? Or is this something I need to chase down and fix? And all the communications between these systems, everyone's implementing this REST API. So there's the capability for them to talk today, but it's really requiring today the asset owners to do most of the integration. Now that should change, and in fact, as I look at this market in the future, the ability to have meaningful two-way communications between these various components is going to be a key factor in terms of which is the best. Now I do want to point out though that we are not to that point today. So I believe strongly in that prediction, but today we still have people buying products primarily for the asset inventory capability. And perhaps the best example of this is that Dragos last week just added in their new version a significant amount of asset inventory. They had lagged the market leaders for a while in that area, really focusing on detection, but I think they just decided to stop fighting the market. Market wants some asset inventory. That's where the market is today, so they now offer it. And it's really not that difficult. It really just takes a good packet jockey and some time, and you can create an asset inventory. Most of the competitors, even the tier 3 competitors, have a decent asset inventory. Now, I want to talk just real briefly on vulnerability management, because having this good software inventory is required for you to know what patches you're missing. And it also can be very helpful in deciding what to patch when. Art Mannion at CERT and some people at S4 have an effort ongoing on this to use a decision tree to determine what to patch when, and it leverages information that should be fairly static in your asset inventory, things like criticality and zone and safety implications. And the idea is you only need to apply a small percentage of the patches immediately, a slightly larger percentage at next scheduled outage, and actually most of them you don't need to apply until you do a major upgrade because they really don't involve any risk reduction. But this capability, if you have a good asset inventory to determine what to patch when, should be very automated and should reduce the patching burden. Okay, I want to spend the remaining time strictly on detection, and I think one of the most important things to realize is detection is not just these products. That when you're thinking about how am I going to detect attacks on my ICS network, you want to think about where are all the places I could detect attacks. What are my detection sources? For example, you don't want to implement one of these, let's say, hard to use or certainly a large investment to use products if you're not monitoring your endpoint detection to investigate whenever malware is found on your network, or if you're not investigating when your firewall is blocking egress attempts. I mean, we've seen configure on ICS networks just banging against that firewall and getting blocked. If you're not looking at those messages, you're not ready for this, or when new admin users are put in place. So you want to make sure you start looking at these products as part of, first of all, overall detection capability, and secondly, at the right point in your detection maturity. So if we look at these tools, in some ways they're remarkably similar to network IDS that we saw in the enterprise for many years. You're essentially passively monitoring network on a span port or a tap and passively collecting it. You're analyzing it through a set of signatures, and you still have this huge issue of tons and tons of data to deal with. Certainly you need to do some tuning. Once it's tuned, that data will go down, but still you need talented people to review what you're seeing from these products. Now, where they're different is they do have ICS protocol intelligence. I really take my hat off to the teams that have created that. It's amazing how fast they've built that into the products. They do alert on legitimate high-risk commands. So for example, if someone is loading new logic or stopping unsolicited response, you'll get alerts to that. They do have some anomaly detection, So looking for new communications or different communication patterns. And then a number of them are adding in playbooks, which are helping you to take what you're seeing in terms of correlated incidents and figure out how to respond to them. Again, though, when you put one of these in, you are going to get a lot of information, and it can come 24/7. So what are you going to do with it? In one sense, you should say, I shouldn't even bother with this because I don't have the team to look at this. And we have some examples where when we ran our ICS Detection Challenge, for instance, it generated 400 gigabytes of traffic from one site in less than 2 hours. And we provided 130 gigabytes to some of the contenders, and some of their systems gagged and crashed on that. So you're talking about a lot of data. First of all, can it handle the data? And then what are you going to do with the results? But the other area that I would encourage you to look at early on as part of your decision to purchase one of these products is, what are you going to do with incident response? Because let's say that you're successful and you detect something going on in your control system. There's really very little value of detecting something if you don't have a response capability. And I think one of the underestimated benefits of these products is, even if you're unable to look at the data in real time, these products, if properly configured and deployed, are collecting that information so that after an incident, let's say you had something like Triton and your system crashed. Well, if you had this forensic record that you can investigate, that would be of great value, even if it didn't help you detect it. But one of the keys for this effective response is, first of all, knowing ICS. So your incident response team actually has to understand what control systems do and the protocols and the technologies. And secondly, understand the tool that you purchased. So let's say you bought a Nozomi system. You would want someone on the incident response team who was expert in Nozomi. So for that reason, my second prediction is that these companies that are selling these products, a number of them will actually change their business model, and their incident response retainers will be their major revenue source. It's great recurring revenue, and as you'll see, I think the product price is going to go down. So this recurring revenue from incident response retainers is going to be huge for them. So far, the only one that's really pursuing that is Dragos, but I would expect that to change. Okay, shifting back to detection. You've put this system in place. It's generating these alerts. Well, what are you going to do with this data? What the vendors in this space are doing is they're saying, here, look at my demo. Look at how you can use my management GUI to investigate the situation, figure out what's going on, and take action. That's one approach. The second approach would be to use an OT SIM. So the idea here would be, yeah, it's great, I want this passively monitored information, but I also want to be looking at my firewall logs, my Windows logs, my endpoint protection logs. I want to be looking at all my data sources and being able to correlate these. I don't want to be looking at my, let's say, my Clarity screen and then having to pivot over and look at 5 other screens. So there is the possibility of an OT SOC. And then the last one is to send the data up to the enterprise SOC. Now we've had at S4, we've had debates, enterprise SOC versus OT SOC. I'm quite convinced that for the vast majority of asset owners, it's going to be the enterprise SOC that's going to win. And I think one of the most compelling cases for this was we had at S4 19, we had a CyberX was one of the sponsors, and on the sponsor stage, they had a asset owner on stage with them. And of course, when you're a vendor and you bring up an asset owner, they're going to sing the praises of your product. But in a moment of candor, the asset owner said, we love the CyberX product. It's fantastic, but we send all the data to QRadar. We don't actually even look at the CyberX GUI, the CyberX management. And I think you're going to find that to be true for most of the systems. Which leads me to my third prediction. I think we're in a bubble today because the enterprise SOCs really aren't capable of dealing with these incidents yet. We're in a bubble now where people are looking at these management GUIs and actually thinking they're going to use them. But in the end, they're going to be very unimportant. They're going to be used to configure the sensors and perhaps just to pass data back and forth to the SOC as a collector or an initial analyzer. So people are not going to say, oh, I want to buy product X as opposed to product Y because I like their GUI so much better, because they're not going to be looking at that GUI once it's deployed. So if that screen is not used as part of the detection process, then it's of lesser value and it's not going to command the same price. Now, the exception to this, and this again ties into the incident response angle on this, is you could have your third party on retainer who knows that product inside and out remotely either being sent that data and when an incident happens actually interacting with that device. So they might not be looking at the GUI on site, but they might be looking at that information off of site. So there again, the value shifts from the product price you paid for that management system to the incident response retainer you're paying. The fourth prediction, I almost should call this one done. It's not being realized today, but it's so obvious that it's going to happen. And that is that these sensor appliances that are now being deployed, connected to the spam ports on switches, are actually going to be integrated into switches. They're going to be either as containers, as virtual machines, maybe as cards, but probably containers is the most likely. And you already see this with the Cisco acquisition of Centrio and their cyber vision product. We've seen these sensors integrated into Siemens network devices. Now, when you think about that, now it's not this standalone appliance, but it's just part of the switch. And almost all the time when you see security integrated into network infrastructure, it commands a percentage price of that network infrastructure device. So 20% at tops? So you're going to see the sensor prices also go down dramatically. And think about that now. You're talking about the price of the sensors going down, the price of the management going down. That's quite a different world. And this is another reason why I think the services side of it is going to be where a lot of these companies make their revenue. I had wondered if one of the tier 3 vendors that wasn't actually competitive was going to just jump to this position, essentially slash prices dramatically, do everything embedded in switches, charge almost nothing for the management GUI, and just see if they could become competitive while seriously hurting their revenue and profits. But it would have been quite an aggressive move. With Cisco getting into the market, I think that time has passed. So if you think about what I've said here, we're talking about lots of change. First of all, this main reason why people are even considering these products, creating an asset inventory, it's not going to be a key part of the detection product. Now, you will send, hey, I saw something new on the network notices to my asset management system. The main reason why a lot of people are buying these today is going to go away. Second, the ICS Detection GUI isn't going to matter. It's going to be integrated with the SOC system. Your sensors will be in your switches. And the last thing, and I'm going to talk about the actual competitors in this space, but any of the independents today is unlikely to be around and independent with the same goals as they have today in the future. So we're talking about a huge amount of change in this market. So I would give you, if you're an asset owner, the same advice that I gave almost 2 years ago. And that is, be very careful with what you're doing. Perhaps slow down. In one sense, I say slow down, pilot these systems, don't commit to things. That might no longer be as true as it was 2 years ago. It might be the time for you to get a little more aggressive. The most important thing when you're talking to management is that you tell them what you're putting in now is likely to be ripped and replaced in 2 to 3 years. So you're setting expectations. You're not saying we're buying this and this is going to solve our problems for the next 10 or 20 years like they're used to in operations. Now, the good news is you can buy these things as subscriptions. So you can say, hey, we're just buying this on an annual basis. Now, as I was putting this together, I thought, well, that's a lot of predictions, a lot of advice, but what would I do if I was an asset owner? And every environment is going to change, so this is not universal advice, but if I had to come up with one set of advice as to how to approach this market space, this is it on this slide. I would start with an asset management solution. I think that's the right place to start. Maybe not even starting with one of these detection solutions. I would get my asset management solution in place, and then I would get a detection solution, and I would only have 2 goals in my first installation of this detection solution. One is to communicate with my asset management solution so that I know when there's something new on my network. And secondly, just to record my forensic data so I can respond after incident. Even before I tried to stand up my own detection effort, I would get incident response on retainer. Preferably one that I could call and have them look at the product I bought. They would have that product expertise. And then once I had that under control, I would focus on SOC integration. So I wouldn't be trying to build my OT monitoring, OT detection capability. I'd be working at how do I best send this to the SOC and maybe have my incident responder as level 2 or level 3 support for the SOC. Now I wanted to finish up talking a little bit about the companies. I don't track very closely the asset management companies. I have a list of them up there. PAS is by far the biggest. Langner with his OT base is kind of interesting because, this is Ralph Langner of the Stuxnet fame, and his is a much newer, smaller shop. It's very nimble and is putting out some amazing things. They don't have all this legacy to carry along with them like some of the others do. And then you have Asset Guardian, and some of the DCS vendors have their own solutions. Although I would look carefully at those to see if they're going to support your solutions from different vendors in terms of asset management. From the detection side, it's very difficult to determine who is the best from a strictly technical standpoint. We tried to do this in the ICS Detection Challenge, and it took us about 600 hours to put together a good test. It's not like asset inventory where you can just collect a PCAP, send it to them, and say, tell me what's on my network. In this case, you actually have to create an incident. All the vendors will show you how they can create an incident and they can detect the incident they created, but that's really not showing you much because they won't show you anything they can't do, and they can really rig that. So it's really hard for an asset owner to determine which one does the best detection. So for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been looking at this and been putting the competitors into different tiers. And actually, more than technical capability, what I'm finding that defined the tiers was the factors you see here. First of all, who was getting in the bake-offs and the pilots? Who was actually competing to win the business? Who are we seeing over and over? And back 2 years ago, it was the same 4 companies. Another thing was how fast were they growing? This had a big effect on how many pilots and bake-offs they could do. So this was almost more of an operational thing. Are they capable of doing all the things required to grow? Raising the money, hiring, training, dealing with all the logistics. I would say that was the major thing that separated the companies, was their abilities to operate, more than their products. But then, of course, with this increased money, then they can support more protocols, they can do more R&D, and eventually you started to see a product gap once the tiers got separated. So when I first looked at this in 2017, I identified about 25 companies pursuing the ICS detection space. And then in 2018, in July of 2018, I broke them into tiers for the first time because we were starting to see separation between these companies. The top tier was Clarity, Dragos, Nozomi, and Security Matters. And you can see there was a second tier, a tier 2, and then about another 15 companies in tier 3. And this was when we were seeing those same 4 companies in almost every pilot. 2 or 3 or 4 of those companies, and occasionally one other company. But they were winning, they were raising more money, they were growing faster. It wasn't that the other companies had bad products, it was just they were being out-executed. I broke them down again last November 19. You only see 3 now, Clarity, Dragos, and Nozomi, and that's because Security Matters was the first major acquisition in this space. They were acquired by Forescout. You see that Rataflow made it up to the second tier, largely based on their selection by the Singapore government. That was a major vote of confidence and really a sign that they were going to be around for a while. We lost a few competitors, and you'll see I have a star by Centrio because they were acquired by Cisco right around that time. So since November 19th, we actually have had a number of acquisitions. I mentioned we had Forescout buying Security Matters, Cisco bought Centrio, Tenable buys Indigi. And so we're seeing that the tier 2 vendors specifically are getting thinned out. And it's probably, when you look at the price, those aren't great prices. I mean, they're more money than I've ever sold a company for by far. So congrats to those people. They've accomplished things that very few people do, but they're not the home runs. And my guess is the remaining tier 1 companies have a valuation much higher, and the tier 3 companies just aren't big enough to be of interest. I also broke out in my analysis the companies that were unlikely to sell the product. So for example, Kaspersky has an OT security offering, and they'll always have that. they're not really a startup in this space. If you're a Kaspersky customer, it makes a lot of sense to look at these. And same with GE and Honeywell. But one of the things that happens when these companies get acquired is the way they develop the product and their purpose in the product line changes a lot. So for example, Forescout is big into NAC, and they're probably not going to care as much about developing that silent defense product. It's not going to go away, but their real goal is to find companies, large companies that have ICS, and get them to buy the whole Forescout solution, including the ICS. So it's an important part. The ICS is sometimes the tail that wags the dog. Cisco buys Centrio. Well, that's obvious. They wanted to have that capability in their network infrastructure gear. But it probably means that the continued development of the ICS capabilities is going to be degraded. I mean, that's typically what we see when Cisco buys something. The product advancement goes down and it becomes an integrated part of Cisco. And similarly, the one that I actually thought was most interesting was Tenable buying Indegy, because there's a lot of synergy there. But Tenable's going to want to sell their security center. And guess what? Now Security Center works in OT as well. These are no longer standalone offerings. They make a lot of sense to buy Tenable's OT capability if you're a Security Center user. It doesn't make a lot of sense to even consider it if you're not going to use Security Center in the enterprise. So where we are today, I just did an analysis, and you see the link at the bottom is to a page with all my analysis in order, which includes other videos and a lot of articles about what's going to happen in this space. But we still have the same big three on the top tier. My latest article has predictions on those top three. You see that tier 2 has just about flushed out. CyberX is rumored to be being acquired by Microsoft, although given what's gone on with COVID, I'm not sure that's going to happen. And Radiflow is probably going to stay where they are just as a Singapore partner in my mind. But you see, tier 2 is almost gone. And really, tier 3 has cleared out as well. I have it listed here as SCADAfence and 5 others. I think SCADAfence might jump up to tier 2, but the 5 others are really bit players. So someone may acquire them for their technology, or I guess there's always a chance that now that this market has really emptied out, one of them will get another big round of funding and try to jump up to take the place of the ones that have left. So that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. My contact information is up there. I highly encourage you to look at that page with all the detection information and check out the videos on the YouTube channel. Subscribe to my podcast, all that good stuff. But at this point, I'll go live and start to take some questions.